And I really wanted to bring David on tonight as a guest because I think what he's done with his time in ministry and what he does now is super important. And so our topic for tonight is about conflict in spiritual practice and what that looks like. And I think conflict as a spiritual practice, I guess I should say. I think for me and for most of us, we think about spiritual practice. We think about, the things that we do personally, whether it's a morning devotional or evening devotional or lunch devotional, right? Or maybe if we're really good, we've got some meditation time here or there built into our week. But from my conversations with you, I get a sense that spiritual practice is something much more robust than that from your point of view.
It is. I think that was one of the benefits I really got from some of my teaching in Regent College. Part of my draw of being there was that it pulled in people from all walks of life. It wasn't a place that people just went because they're going into full-time ministry. Some of us were, some of us did, but some of us also, some people may come just for a class. A lot of people would come for a year, maybe a sabbatical from whatever work they are doing, and they get to go back changed. And so I got to take classes with people who were not in this somewhat of a, sometimes we have more of a bubble of church life. They were in about all of the world. And so that was a big, strong emphasis we had is how are we living this out day to day? And for me, it really came together in the idea of spiritual practice. In particular, I had a class that was really the culmination of everything that I had learned along the way. It was taught by a fellow named Gordon Smith, not really known here, but fairly well known in the Northwest region. And he had this way of teaching that brought it all together for me, shall I say. He would bring out our theology. He would bring out some of the things that we usually do see as spiritual practice, which would, commonly we would say, okay, prayer, certainly a spiritual practice. Sitting down, reading our Bibles, learning more about our Bibles, spiritual practice. And he would talk about, though, how did these things then flow over into our everyday? So one of my favorite examples was part of our theology that we were learning is we are here to, God placed us here to also take care of the world. We take care of ourselves, take care of one another, also take care of the world. So care for creation is something that we can pull out of our theology. What really brought this to my sense of everyday life was when in our class, Professor Smith was talking about, okay, sometimes on a Wednesday night, I'm standing out sorting my recycling in the rain, and we were in Vancouver and it rained a lot. Sometimes I'm out sorting my recycling on Wednesday night, and that's a spiritual practice. And I was like, wow, it is, isn't it? It's not just doing something good or something I feel like I ought to be doing, but actually if I'm going to care for creation, then if on a Wednesday night I'm standing in the rain sorting my recycling, that can be a spiritual practice. Just brought it all together for me.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds so. It's a spiritual practice is really about kind of foundationally how we view the world. I was chatting with my youngest daughter. She had her first confirmation class on Sunday, and as we were coming home, she said, "I don't know that I'm going to remember all that in terms of dates and facts and everything." And I said, it's not so much about learning dates and facts. I mean, those are important, but what we're really trying to do is shape the way you think about the world, right? Teaching you how to look at the world, theologically, or from the tradition of Lutheranism in particular this year in confirmation, or how to view it through the lens of how God acts. And so it sounds like spiritual practice is another way to undergird kind of those everyday, a lens through which you see the world.
Absolutely. And also, as you're talking about the worldview, like the worldview that what we are doing matters beyond ourselves. What is spiritual practice? Well, it's sort of looking beyond I'm sitting here sorting my recycling, but no, I am here and I am joining with God's desire to heal this world. Well, that's different. Same thing, but that's the worldview that sees it differently, right?
Yeah. So, and that would, for us, we would touch on the word vocation, like what is our call in life, right? And that's very much part and parcel to everyone's call. That's not something that's exclusive to just pastors or or just certain types of people, but everyone has a call to spiritual practice then.
Absolutely. And that's where also that expansion is so helpful, because I know a lot of people seeking to be faithful Christians in their vocation. They think, well, if I pray before I start my day, if I bring my team together and I pray, then that's being Christian. And it is, but I want to see it as more than that. I want to see it still as the work, the actual work you're doing. And I know from what you say, you're in line with that, but the actual work you're doing, however it is, if it's healing relationships with self, with people, if you are making this world a better place, that all those things themselves are also spiritual practice alongside of anything you may do in terms of prayer, or lots of places you may not be allowed to do things like that. So how can you still be practicing your spirituality, especially if you're limited in some areas?
Right. Which, it can be limited in many parts of the world, but even here, we're a little bit limited just by the sake of politeness in terms of our conversations and everyday. Well, especially right now, right? The two topics that are usually off the table are religion and politics, and those are really off the table right now, right? At least for the next couple of months. So.
Yeah, they are. They are. I mean, that's jumping ahead of us, already getting into the idea of conflict, but
Yeah, you're right. I'm kind of
right.
presaging that. Yeah, segue.
Yeah, I wanted to mention too, the other one that really helped shape what I have viewed as spiritual practice and changed the way I see it is a book that I read called An Altar in the World. It's by Barbara Brown Taylor. And it's so interesting, I encountered her out on the West Coast because she is here in Georgia. And when she wrote this book, it's got a wonderful introduction for one, but the various chapters that she brings out in terms of spiritual practice are really amazing. And I feel like a lot of my work to call exploring conflict as spiritual practice is really like adding another chapter to her book, is what I feel like. So she has things, she's got the practice of saying no. I love that one. I think we all could use more of that in our lives. The practice of getting lost. That's good. Some of my other favorites, the practice of feeling pain. Like, to imagine feeling pain is usually a pretty negative thing, shall we say. So to imagine that we can see this as a spiritual practice, I love how, again, it's reframing what we may think about something. It's giving that worldview of what if there's something more? What if there's something more to what's happening, to what's going on in my life?
So someone in the comments asked, is this like Brother Lawrence? And I don't know that reference. I know Barbara Brown Taylor, but I don't know Brother Lawrence. Are you familiar with him?
I would imagine that sort of reference to Brother Lawrence choosing to wash dishes in such a way that it becomes a spiritual practice. I think he talks about it in terms of a meditation. And actually the administrator from the church that I was in Vancouver, she never wanted to have a dishwasher in her house. And it was because that was her practice. All she wanted was she wanted a window over the sink. That's what she wanted, a window over the sink so that she could wash dishes, reflect, sometimes pray, sometimes be looking out onto her children playing in the backyard. And that would be her time. And so absolutely, I would imagine that's a reference for Brother Lawrence. And I would say, yes, being able to do something where you can see something beyond just what is there, to be both present in the moment, but see also something beyond that moment. It's a great reference.
Well, that'd be a kindred spirit for me then. I mean, I think, of the chores, if you listed chores and, what you don't like to do, honestly, doing dishes is something I don't mind doing. There is a sense of enjoyment and introspection in it, whether it's the water or the great view out your window or whatever else. It certainly is conducive to seeing the world in a different way. So, yeah. So good. Okay. Well, and that's awesome because I did not know who Brother Lawrence was, but obviously you do. And so we had a great question about that. So tell me a little bit then about how that plays into conflict. We talked about, you said saying no, which I think is a huge one, right? And some of the other things that were in there. But how then does conflict become a spiritual practice for people?
Yeah, great question, and why we're here tonight, and honestly a big part of why I'm seeking to do what I would like to do in this area, which is it's moving in the area of being a life coach, but especially in that realm of conflict. And yes, we are in a time when there is a lot of conflict around us. Certainly, even just from COVID, some things come up, sometimes in family, a lot of times in ourselves. And then we're also, yes, in a highly charged atmosphere with politics. I've noticed how often it is that I will bring up the topic of conflict, and how often then it does go into talking about politics right now. And I've had to, again, coming from an outside perspective and joining into this atmosphere, I've had to even negotiate this a few times, friends, neighbors, just trying to learn what, even for myself still, I've got some ideas about what healthy conflict is, but what is that then in this realm? So two things I think that I set as my foundation in terms of conflict as a spiritual practice. And that's recognizing, for one, conflict's inevitable. So if we're trying to do this in terms of everyday spirituality, like, conflict is going to happen. It is going to keep coming up to us in various ways. I think these days, even if you stick your head in the sand, I think you might still find you'll find somebody who doesn't like that.
Yeah.
I don't
There's
know.
no neutral ground anymore, right?
No, so we've always known it, and especially now it feels as though it is rather inevitable. It is a part of our lives. The second foundation I work from is that without some work, some practice, or some coaching, we are not naturally equipped for modern conflict. This is something that needs practice. And I'll talk a little bit about what's around with spiritual practice specifically, but whether it's spiritual practice or not, in some way, we need to be able to practice conflict and to be able to do it well. And the reason I say that is because we have amazing bodies and minds that have kept us safe and alive for a very long time. And for that, I am very thankful. I am very thankful to God for these minds and these bodies we've been given. We have reactionary responses in dangerous situations. We don't have to go through the 20 rational thoughts of, okay, there's a bear. What I should do now is, okay, I should back away. Okay, now, by then the bear's already got you, right?
Right.
This even surprisingly happened it was yesterday when we were driving. My daughter was turned around, and unfortunately for the first time, we got rear-ended. Well, she saw it coming. But she knew somehow, she's conditioned herself. She didn't even have time to think about it, but she just turned herself around and straightened up so that she could absorb the impact, which thankfully was small, but still, compared to being turned around sideways, that would have been really different. So that's why I'm like, I am so thankful for our bodies and our natural responses and how they keep us safe, even still, because we do still encounter some dangerous situations. The difficulty you can probably see me leading into is that these reactions can cause trouble in the situations where we feel like we're being threatened, but actually there is no danger.
Right.
And that is the basis of conflict. When we get in conflict, we have the natural reactions are coming up. Something is telling us this is a danger. So the fight, flight, or freeze, those things are activating within us. And so to say, again, that's normal. There's nothing wrong with you when that's happening, but it's seldom helpful because we no longer can settle our fights and disagreements with a club. Yeah. That's sort of what our body wants to do, no matter how socially unacceptable that is now. I was thinking about, we tried to substitute this a little bit with dueling, and we saw in Hamilton, the musical, that also is not very effective as a substitute.
What? I think we should bring that back. Come on.
Maybe a different way. Maybe the safer ways. Yeah, I'm not sure. But but that is to say, we still need to settle our disagreements, and a lot of the ways that our bodies want to settle them, it isn't helpful. We've got this adrenaline a lot of times. The more serious, the more you're feeling under threat. So we've got adrenaline coming through us. Well, that's not going to help at a time when we do need to either be more settled, to be less anxious in the moment, and to also be engaging with our rational brain. Because sometimes something gets attacked, someone calls someone else a name, you get called a name, something like that gets me right up there. I've got my triggers. I would assume.
So we're fighting against our instincts at the end of the day for having a rational or a positive outcome to conflict. We have to fight against our baser instinct.
Exactly. So I would equate it to, I had the privilege, I was in a small town the last 3 years, and I had the privilege of being on the volunteer fire department as well. And that is something where, that pager goes off and the adrenaline is just going crazy, and the early ones, they were like, the calls were like nothing. They really weren't even really emergencies. I mean, this was sort of my gradual entry. It was nice. It was good for me. So not even really emergencies, but I'm like driving there, the adrenaline's going, I'm ready to hop out, ready to take over. That was something that I had to be in that experience enough times, and they set me up to succeed in that. Rookies really aren't on the front line to begin with.
Right.
And that's a big reason why, is because we're just trying to sort through our own adrenaline right now, And so then, 2 years in, something like that, then I have been in those situations enough, known how I need to be responding, been able then to calm down that adrenaline reaction, to use it appropriately. Maybe it is needed. Maybe we are having to carry someone. Maybe we are having to be at a car rollover where we need to extricate someone from the car. So some amount of adrenaline can be helpful in that, but I need to be able to be in control of it. I can't just be going crazy. That's how you really hurt yourself, your team, or other people.
Yeah.
And so that is, the idea of conflict, healthy conflict, is that we can have ourselves in these places in a safe environment, really is the ideal, if you can do that, and that we can practice and then find ourselves having healthier ways of conflict.
And I think one of the things, we've got a comment in here about, which kind of dovetails into kind of one of my questions I had, which was reconciling conflict that is very old and generational, which is one of the issues we have in America right now, right? With some of the racial unrest that we have, and some of well, that jives in the political arena a little bit, but it's also just basic humanity in terms of understanding where people are and the conflict as it's gone on over time. And so we had a question about how do we do that. My sense, though, is as we're talking about conflict, if we're fighting instinct, we're going to have to train ourselves. And if we're going to have to train ourselves, like you in firefighting, we're going to have to start much smaller than that individually, with reconciling with a neighbor or overcoming conflicts with a family member, before we can kind of build into those larger conflicts. Is that a good assumption?
I think that's really good, and it does link into one of my thoughts about how do we look at this again as a specifically spiritual practice, and I love that question that's being asked, especially in terms of generational, because part of then how do we engage this as a spiritual practice is to look at Jesus. There was plenty. I mean, almost everything really is about conflict surrounding the narrative of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so when I'm looking at myself, I want to look at how do I respond? And then how is it I'm looking at Jesus as our example of when did he respond in conflict? Especially when did he get angry? A lot of times that's what I'm tracing, what makes me angry, what's getting him angry. And it's interesting how many times Jesus was slighted and he did not get angry with that. I mean, he lived this life of self-sacrifice, and certainly we can look to times at the cross, but we can look well before that too, when he is having people calling him names, saying that he's not who he says he is, all these things. It really doesn't seem to bother him. Or if it does, I would look underneath to say, well, what is it that's actually bothering him? Because I don't think it's the name calling, because I don't see that getting to him. But
he
instead,
just seems very comfortable with losing a lot of the time. He doesn't seem to bother him to be on the losing end of something.
Yeah. Whereas that's what's getting me riled up. Like,
yeah.
when I'm being slighted, that's what's setting off my triggers. So that's one of those areas I'm working on, and I think most of us are. But Jesus does get angry. We say, and we sometimes hold on to this. Well, it's righteous anger. Jesus had righteous anger. But I want to look at that, and he got angry. I would say the way I would label it is when the least, last, lost, or nearly dead were being hurt, when they were being pushed down. And that's where I want to say, when we look at the generational conflict and we see people that have less advantages than us, that are still being in some way oppressed, pushed down, there is a legitimacy to us feeling an anger and wanting to do something about it. Now, the difficult part, as you allude to, though, is, well, okay, how do we do something? Because obviously running in and, again, clubbing people, which we're seeing some comparisons to that, again, very unhelpful. It is not great. Certainly, the comparison I would make is burning anything. If anyone's using that to express their anger, I don't know what's behind all the burning, but if anyone's using that, that's not helpful. And it's not helping
Right.
things move forward, right? We can say that. But I am sometimes angry or upset enough, I do want to do something. And that's where I'd say, yes, don't just jump into the argument with your neighbor about this. That's one of the things I was kind of caught up in the other day with one of my neighbors. I'm not going to try to, well, let's say figuratively beat him over the head over something, because it's just not going to be helpful. But instead, what I want to help facilitate in particular is, how do we set up an environment where we could even engage some of these really difficult topics? And I didn't know how to do that a few years ago. And, Kevin, when you and I met, I shared a little bit of the result was because I didn't know how to, and our board also wanted to, like, everybody had a great desire to engage in some pretty significant conflict, certainly some pretty significant personal wounds that were going on or happening, or that were felt wounds. Those things were happening, and we all had a heart to engage with those things well. But the reality is, again, who's teaching us? How do we know how to do this? And I didn't have that education in seminary. I'm not faulting the seminary. It's just I didn't. And we tried some really good practices. They weren't the best that we needed for large scale discussion. And so things erupted. Things just sort of kept getting worse and worse, despite everybody's best intention. But that's when I learned a specific way of engaging with our conflict. That's when I learned to use the circle way, which is a specific way that we set our intentions. We create an environment where we've thought through the questions that we want to ask. Who should be in the room? How are we going to set up the room? And one setup that is consistent, as I say, the circle way, is that we're set up in a circle. We're set up in a formation where there is no one power dynamic sitting in the front, shall we say. That each person is a leader. One of the subtexts for the circle way is a leader in every chair. And so I engaged this. The church that I ended up having to leave, they engaged it after I left, but we all found an amount of healing from this, because it created a space where a person can speak without having the person, let's say, across the table coming back at them, where we get a chance to say, this is what I've experienced. This is my story. And it changes the conversation. It certainly changes the dynamic, changes any sort of power dynamic, but it changes the conversation.
Well, it sounds like so much of conflict, especially, because our instincts are to ratchet conflict up, as we've talked about, what you're talking about is almost like drawing a circle around the battlefield and just saying, we're only going to fight in this area on these topics in this manner. So in a sense, it is kind of a ritualized duel, right? We're saying, hey, this is the only way we're going to engage in conflict, and setting some boundaries and some ground rules around that, so that there is a clear path forward for our discussion.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I was just thinking, when we look to the circle way, we really are looking at also as an ancient practice. We look back to how the Bible was passed down through the years, and a lot of people will say a lot of this was an oral tradition. It was passed in the beginning, it was passed around campfires, that people were sitting in a circle in the space around the campfire. And this is how they held themselves together as a community, both passing stories along, being able to share in life together. And so in a sense, I also see us returning to what could be an older pattern that served our ancestors well.
Well, that would be a very reforming way of doing things, which is great for both of our traditions, for sure. So, yeah. So we're just a little over 30 minutes now. So I want to thank everybody for hanging with us. We had one request, David, to bring you back to our Bible study on Wednesday night, because I think people want to pester you with more questions. So we'll talk about that after we go off the air. But
Okay.
just, last little bit here, is there anything else you'd like to share with people, or any kind of final tidbits you'd like to give before we sign off for the night?
Just very briefly, because I feel as though I've talked about good conflict. I think I'm still feeling like I fell a little short in terms of what is a spiritual practice of conflict.
Okay.
So maybe just one more thing to add to that, and that is that any spiritual practice is a journey inward. And we can see that as opposed to oftentimes conflict itself is so much of an outward focus, the negative conflict. It is, you have hurt me. It's your fault, those sorts of things. That's where, again, it's a natural thing, but it's where we go, is to see it very outward. But what is that inward journey instead, to understand ourselves? I've talked about anger as a big part of it, understanding our anger. What did trigger me in this? Why is this so upsetting to me? And is that okay? If it is, how do I express it better? If it's not, how do I sort through my own feelings? And that in and of itself, to me, is a very inward journey, which I think is the core of spiritual practice. So just to add a little bit of that.
I like it. No, you're absolutely right. And that's where the difference is between, kind of basic instinctual conflict and what you're talking about, right? Because if you are encountering a bear in the wilderness, the bear doesn't care how you feel about it. But we're not dealing with other bears. We're dealing with other human beings, other individuals, and how you feel does matter to them. And how they feel should matter to you as well. And so that's definitely kind of a key part of us looking at as a spiritual practice, is recognizing humanity across the table, or across the circle, or around the circle, I guess is the better way to say it, with us. So Good stuff. Thank you, David, for joining me tonight. It's awesome. For you guys who would like to learn more from David, he has a company called Living Resolutions, and at livingresolutionscoach.com is your website. That's right, David?
Right.
So if you'd like to hook up with David, he offers individual sessions for what we've talked about tonight, and also works with groups and churches as well. So if you know of a community that would benefit from his wisdom and experience, he's available for that as well. So David, thank you very much for being here with me tonight. Thank all of you for joining me tonight. If you do have any prayer requests or other questions or anything like that, if you will drop them in the comment box, I'll check them out later this evening and make sure that I stay on top of them. And David also is connected with us on Facebook. So if you do have other questions there for him as well, I'm sure he can drop by and spout a few words for you as well. But thank you so much for being here tonight, David. We will see about bringing you back at some point. I think everybody really, really enjoyed it.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Can I pray a blessing over you all?
Yeah, please close us out in prayer. That'd be awesome.
Okay. Thank you, Lord, for this group of people that have tuned in. Thank you for Kevin, for his tireless work of making this possible. I pray a blessing over all those who have listened in, because conflict is a part of our lives, and we want to be faithful. We want to be faithful in following your example, in our anger, to be angry over what angers you, but also to be able to engage those things in a helpful way, one that heals our world more than divides it. So Lord, I pray a blessing over Kevin's church, this community that is, they will have their own difficulties. I pray, Lord, that they can engage in them well. And I pray a blessing over each life that is tuning in to this evening, that is struggling perhaps through some particular conflict. Oftentimes right now it's happening in our families with either a generation above us or our kids. Lord, we love and care for people even when we're in conflict, and may that shine through more than anything. And where we're having trouble, Lord, would you help us? In Christ's name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, David. I appreciate it. We will be checking base with you again later. And again, if you guys want to get a hold of David, livingresolutionscoach.com is the best way to do so. So thank you all for being here tonight, and I will sign off on the live stream. We'll catch you guys later. Bye.